we were getting into it by this tree line in a schoolhouse, and Alpha Company and Bravo Company lost 22 guys in 3 days. It was something that happened so quick. My body got shredded because I turned when we were advancing forward just to distance myself away from him. And we had a word or two and moved, and this thing just blew up. I don't know how long I was unconscious. I heard commands like, medic, medic, medic.
Ask a Vet is dedicated to documenting and preserving veteran stories in their own words on their own terms before their stories are gone forever. Each episode is an unfiltered conversation about who they were before service during war and their adjustment to coming home. If you believe these stories matter, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us preserve the voices of those who served. Ask a Vet is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorials built in their honor. Every flight is free to veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support the mission, visit utahhonorflight.org or find your local hub at honorflight.org. And now back to the show.
Okay, my name is Josh Cruze. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Sunset Park area of Brooklyn, 1950, March 21st, 1950. Parents are Puerto Rican. They came to the United States 1941. They looked for employment, and I was raised in Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
How did you end up in Vietnam? Let's hear that story.
Okay, so my dad went to the Army during World War II. He served in World War II. My Uncle Carlos also served in the Army. He went to Korea. My Uncle Jim, he served in the Army during peacetime. So the Vietnam War started, and it was my turn to serve our country. At 16, I was already thinking about, what service I would be interested in joining. We had the draft back then. At 18, you would get a letter to report to the draft service, for a draft service. And I told by my dad, make sure that if you get drafted, you join the Navy or the Air Force. He didn't want me to join the Army, of course, because of the images we were seeing on TV. I think the Vietnam War started about 62, 63 with advisors, and then eventually became a full-scale war around 65, 66. A lot of the older neighborhood kids that were older than me were coming back from their service in Vietnam. So we got to hear some of their stories and what we saw on TV. So when I decided that maybe the Marine Corps is something I might want to look into, I announced that to my dad. He says, that is not going to happen. You're not joining the Marine Corps. He said, do you see what's going on every night in the nightly news? You don't want to be, in that war. I did my time. Uncle Carlos, Uncle Jim, wait till they call you. And if they do call you, you're joining the Navy, the Air Force. So, we're rebellious at that age, 16, 15, we're going to do what we want to do. So I went to a recruiter and told him what the situation was, that my dad, served, my uncle, but he wants me to join the Navy, the Air Force. He said, screw that. He says, no, you're doing the right thing. He said, you know what? Let me talk to them, set up an appointment one evening, and I'll come over and we'll see what we can do. I told my dad that I invited the recruiter to come down, and he got angry. He said, well, why did you do that? Why? I'm not signing, because I was 17. He had to sign. to get
your parents had to sign?
Had to sign to join any military service. So I begged him, and so he said, okay. He says, he'll come, but I'm not signing anything. The man came in. He was tall, all buffed out. He had his medals on, and we sat down in the dining room table, and he started to pitch the Marine Corps, how great it was, and the tradition that it had, and I was doing the right thing, and I wouldn't see combat because I'm 17. It wouldn't be until I'm 18 if they needed me to go to Vietnam, and by then the war might be over. Wrong. So my mom was so frustrated with me nagging them to join, that she finally hit the table and says, "You know what? Let him go. He wants to go. Let him go." And so my dad said to the recruiter, "I'm going to sign, but if anything happens to him, I'm going to blame you." And I was so embarrassed that my parents were talking to this guy who came to talk to him about the Marine Corps. It seemed kind of disrespectful, but my mom signed, my dad signed. And my dad was a tough guy. He worked on the waterfront for at that time, about 25 years. He was a really well-built guy from working on the ships. My mom was a seamstress, so hardworking people, great folks. They finally signed. And when I saw the recruiter to the door, I apologized. I said, "Look, I'm really sorry, that they behave that way." He said, "No, I understand. They're concerned, but you did the right thing." So he left. That was around a week after my 17th birthday. I was told that I wouldn't be going to South Carolina to Parris Island until May because they had to wait for a training to start and end at a certain time period. So I left in May of 1967.
And you were 17.
I was 17, 2 months after my 17th birthday. And I remember this moment, my dad was having his breakfast before he went to work. And I went to say goodbye, I'm leaving. My friend Eddie Donahue, a kid from the neighborhood, was going to drive me. He was excited for me, and so, and I remember my dad was just so sad, heartbroken, that I was leaving for the first time ever. And, I was in the house 17 years and now I'm going to be leaving and to God knows what for 2.5 months. So I left and Eddie Donahue took me to Fort Hamilton Army Base, beautiful base. It was there since the colonial times, it's right under the Verrazano Bridge, beautiful setting there on the Bay of New York. And I was then there with a bunch of other guys from Brooklyn, New York. Some of them were 17-year-old. And then they took us on a bus to JFK. They took us into a room and they had us sworn in to the military, And then first time on an airplane, I flew from JFK to South Carolina. Never been on a plane. It was so exciting for me, to have that experience. From there, we took a bus to Marine Corps recruit training base in South Carolina, Parris Island. And we got off the bus, and when they started barking at us, like we've seen so many times, in the, on the movies, I got out and I kind of expected some of those guys on the bus had gone to some type of military training, like, pre-military. They were all pumped up. They were going to join the Marine Corps. And then I remember that they started using some words that I wasn't accustomed to hearing, some of it F-bombs here and there. I grew up in a Catholic household, went to mass and did my sacraments, and we couldn't even say damn in my house. My dad would, say, "I'm going to wash your mouth with soap if I ever hear you say, a word." I couldn't say damn. And here I hear these guys yelling at us and using, expletives and things I've never heard. And I'm saying, what did I get myself into? Oh. And I started my training, I remember the first time I was in my bunk, they had to lay in attention, I had tears coming down my eyes because I thought I made a big mistake. I didn't know if I was going to be able to go through this training. I'd been to the Boy Scouts as military as I got, and I enjoyed that. But week after week went by, and I just kept saying to myself, "You're going to do this, you're going to do this." We had 90 guys in our platoon. 379 was the number of our platoon. They had 4 platoons in that series that was training to graduate. And the only way we could reach out to our parents was letter. There was no phone calls or nothing. You make sure you write to your parents because I don't want to hear that some parents is coming down here and wondering what they're doing to their boy, and 9 weeks, I trained, and my dad wrote and said that he was going to come down to see me graduate, my brother and my mom, which was like crazy, that my dad would do that. And sure enough, I graduated. Proudest day of my life to have gone through an experience like that through 9 weeks. Scared as hell, wondering if I was going to graduate because there were guys who either went AWOL or couldn't make it. They were taken out of the Marine Corps because they just couldn't do the training.
What was the hardest part for you of boot camp? Would you say the physical part?
I think the first 2 weeks of adjustment were the hardest because I'd never been exposed to it. And then once you start getting into a rhythm with the other 90 guys and seeing that they're going through this as well, and it seems like they're keeping up, and we saw the guys that weren't there anymore, like I said, they went AWOL or they did something, that, challenged them. They couldn't go through the training. And so that camaraderie started to kick in of us doing it together because they kept saying, you're a unit, you're Marines. You're not Black, you're not white, you're not Hispanic, you're not Catholic, you're not Muslim. You're Marines, you're all green, you're my maggots. That's what you are. You're the lowest thing on the planet. You're lower than crap. And so when I started to realize, we're all going through this. It's not just me. Don't take it personal. You can do this. So that day of graduation was probably the proudest day of my life to have been put through something that I never been through, to shoot weapons. Never shot a weapon in my life. I had an M14 that I trained with. My platoon won the drill competition. Only one of the platoons can win that award, and it's a golden boot. They test you on the tarmac to see how you march, with your weapons. And so proud that my platoon won that. You have a guy he's a guide arm, and it has the number of your platoon on that flag. And as you go through the training, they have these ribbons, and who passed the physical, who bought the savings bonds, whatever it was, you could tell which platoon was awarded those ribbons. But the only one that you got that the others didn't was the golden boot for the drill competition. So my platoon won that. And when my parents came, it was nice to see my brother and my mom, and my dad was so proud, that I graduated. And for him to drive from New York down to South Carolina, we never did that in our family, even on vacation, right? and I was so happy that he came. My family came to see me. Then they went back, and I was flown to North Carolina to Camp Lejeune for advanced infantry training. And then Camp Lejeune, we trained with N1 rifles, and one of the dangers of dealing with that weapon is if you didn't open the chamber right, it would slip and your thumb would get caught in there, and it hurt like hell. And they would tell you, be careful when you open the chamber. So I went through 5 weeks of advanced infantry training in Camp Lejeune.
Was that as tough as boot camp or no?
No. It was. You were already a hardcore. You graduated. You're a Marine now. Now you're dealing with an infantry situation, And that was another thing, that when we were graduated, and they were proud of us, the drill instructors. They had a pad, or what do you call it? One of those. When you write, it's a
whiteboard,
board, and they had all your names on there, telling you what your MOS was, which is your military occupation.
Yeah,
and if you heard OC31, OC11, OC31, any of the threes, that was infantry. Guys went to train for being in the aviation. Others, embassy duty, and other different parts of the Marine Corps. Some of them got like a guarantee that that's the MOS that they signed up for. They would join, but not me.
What were you thinking of that? Being in the infantry?
At that point, you're really trained to accept whatever the Marine Corps tell you to do. You're on a mission. They already got the brain to function their way 24/7. No matter what they told you, you did it.
Yeah.
You didn't question anything. And if that's what it was, and I came home, I told my dad I was in the infantry. And I was okay. He was proud of me. He saw the change in me from a kid to a young man, and very proud of me. And then 10 days in New York for leave, and then another plane to San Francisco. Again, cross country. Never been cross country, Treasure Island. And was excited. I've heard so much about San Francisco, and here I am with trolley cars and hills and going down to Fisherman's Wharf. And this Brooklyn kid, has never been nowhere, has now been to South Carolina, North Carolina, flown to New York, across the country to San Francisco for like 7 days. And then I got my orders to fly to Hawaii, which is another place I'd ever been. And we flew at night. And when we got in there, they picked us up with these buses to take us to Kaneohe Bay, which is a Marine Corps base. But it was dark, it was nighttime. Went to bed, got up, and the minute we saw the poly and the blue and the green and how beautiful Hawaii was, 1967.
Yeah.
We're talking maybe 25 years after Pearl Harbor, And I was then assigned to be a gunner, machine gunner, M60 machine gunner. That was my weapon with a 45.
At this point, have they been telling you the whole time you're going to Vietnam? There's no question? No, you don't know.
Because I was 17.
Okay.
All the 17-year-olds. We were part of the 5th Marine Division. The Marine Corps has 5 divisions. And the 5th Marine Division was only activated if there was like an all-out war. I mean, major emergency on the planet. And those folks in the 5th Marine Division, and the 27th Marines, were guys who had done this 13 months in Vietnam, the NCOs that were training us, the 17-year-olds, and the lifers, guys who made a career. And there's no chance we're going to war, because these guys had been to Nam, these 17-year-olds are here, and, we're career guys. Until Tet happened in January of 1968. A major offensive all over the country took place. And we heard about it. And so President Johnson activated the 27th Marines of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion to go to Nam. Some of the guys who had served were really angry because they had done the tour. Now they're going back to tempt fate again because of this emergency. So we boarded a troop carrier, the USS Vancouver, at Pearl Harbor. I think it was like the beginning of February of 1968, right after the Tet Offensive, to head to Vietnam. And I remember that when I was on that ship, when we were in formation on a tarmac, you could have helicopters land on the ship, and underneath you could have tanks and amphibious Amtraks, they were called. And when we left Pearl Harbor, sailing out, I said to myself, wow, we're going back to war. And 25 years ago, this place was trashed in World War II, and here we are in another war going out, First time I was on a ship, going across the Pacific, 10 days.
What was going through your brain?
Wondering, I knew I was going to Vietnam because I was still 17. I didn't know what they were going to do with me once we hit the coastal waters. And we talked about it, and I heard some, rumor that we were going to be sent to Okinawa until we turned 18. But we were out there for about, I would say, between 6 to 8 days, waiting for the 2nd and 3rd Battalion, who was flown there. They didn't take a ship to meet us there in Vietnam. And I got seasick. We hit these storms one day. Unbelievable to see a ship go up and down and through these waves, wondering, how did these guys in the Navy do it? How did they survive this? And I'm getting sick. I'm ready to throw up. I'm in my bunk. I'm on my side, moaning, make it go away. And I'm going to war. So then there were the nice times where the Pacific was calm, and you saw these beautiful sunsets of the sun going down at night and rising in the morning. I was, interested in seeing this amazing experience. I'd get up early just to see those things, as I don't know when I'd ever see that again. We hit the coastal waters of Da Nang. They disembarked. The 1st Battalion, 12th Marines. The 17-year-olds were put on the USS Baxter, and we headed to Okinawa. I was sent to Camp Hansen in Okinawa, and I think I was maybe 6 days away from my 18th birthday. And the day that day came, they tapped me on the shoulder, "Be ready to go." I got my gear, boarded a commercial airliner, and headed for Da Nang. And
And back up a little bit. They turned you into a machine gunner.
yeah, at this point, I was a machine gunner. Yeah, and I had my crew, and we trained for 5.5 months from September of 1967 to February. We were training, hitting beaches on Amtrak. I remember there was a time I was in an Amtrak, and it's an amphibious vehicle, and we're like 12 inches from the water line, okay? And we're in there, and water's coming down, and I'm saying, "Are we going to drown this thing before we even hit the beach?" Making this, really loud sound. But we're all there together, maybe 8 or 10 of us. I forget how many could fit in an Amtrak. But we hit the beaches, making those beach landings, and we had an exercise where that if you were caught, they would interrogate you. So they put us in groups of 4, and only a canteen and a compass to get through the enemy lines. Okay, and my friend said, "We're not going to get caught. We're going to get through this. There's no way they're going to catch us." We saw where they stationed these people to capture us and then interrogate us, and we got around those guys, and we teamed up with another 4 guys. I said, "We're going to stay together," because there were 2 NCOs, 2 guys that had the compass and 2 guys that had the canteens of water. We got lost. We didn't know where we were. It's dark. But we weren't going to get caught. So at one point, we were on this. I knew it was like a plantation, because they were growing pineapples, and there's red roads we were walking on dirt. And finally there was like a building, and the dog was barking and kept barking. And the guy came out of the house and says, "Who's out there? Who's out there? I got a weapon. Who's out there?" And one of the NCO says, "We're the United States Marine Corps." Says, "What? We're the United States Marine Corps. What are you guys doing here?" He says, "You're miles away from where you're supposed to be." So the NCO went and talked to the guy, and he gave him directions how to get back to where we're supposed to be. So it's daylight, so and we heard, I think, maybe a helicopter. I probably were looking for us because they didn't know what the hell happened to these 8 guys. And we finally got back. We found our way back, and says, "Captain wants to see you guys." And we standing there, was barking at us, "Where the hell you guys go? You weren't supposed to be there. Something could have happened. We sent people looking for you." And one of the NCOs says, "Sir, we didn't get caught." "Shut up." Get back. We didn't get caught, and they sent us back. And everybody said, "Guys, where did you guys go, man? Everybody was worried about you guys. We didn't get caught." We don't care. So
tell me about the machine gun. Which one did you do?
When I got the machine, when I was assigned the machine gun, it's a bigger weapon. It's not as heavy as people think it is, because the stock is made out of plastic, and the trigger housing, the barrel is probably the heaviest thing on the machine gun, and some of the where the trigger is.
M60
machine gun, and I was made the gunner, so I was responsible for that gun, and I was also assigned a 45 caliber pistol. So if your machine gun malfunctions in combat, at least you have some way to defend yourself. And then you had 3 other guys assigned to your group with that machine gun, an assistant machine gunner, and a couple of other guys who carried the equipment, an asbestos glove that when the barrel gets very hot, they can take the clips, take the hot barrel off, put the new barrel in. So they would carry all that equipment, the cleaning equipment as well, and then also ammo. You need
how much ammo would you guys carry?
I think for me, when I was in Hawaii, maybe 50 rounds, in a little pouch, and maybe they didn't really give you that much. And Nam is a different story. I had Pachavija 200 rounds. I think I had 50 rounds in the little sack that was in the machine gun, and those guys carried a bunch of ammo, probably 200 rounds or 100 rounds each. I can't remember, but we were well stocked.
Did you like that?
Oh yeah. I wanted to be, and grenades, a couple of hand grenades. Had the 45, and then they had their M16, also ammo that they had. But getting back to when I got to Vietnam, there was a guy who came with a Jeep. I was waiting there with my gear, and he said,
"Hold on, where did you fly into?"
Da Nang. Yeah, which was an amazing experience, because I remember as the airline was taxiing, you had these guys like yelling and screaming and jumping up and down, and one of the guys said, "Those are the guys that are going home. They've done their tour." And I said, "Wow!" And I thought to myself, they're finished, and I'm just starting my first day in Vietnam. That's crazy. They're going back to the world. They used to call it. I'm going back to the world. And so disembarked the plane, waited for someone to pick me up, and a guy did with a Jeep. And you Cruze? He says, "Hop in, take you to battalion." I says, "Okay." I got out of the Jeep, and we started heading up, and it hit me for the first time when I looked at his weapon. It was I don't know if it was a shotgun type of a weapon. I said, "Wow, those are real bullets. This is not, it's not a game anymore. This is the real deal, And I started worrying, because I heard about landmines on the roads. I heard about snipers. You hear a lot of stories, and you don't know what to believe sometimes. But when I got back to battalion, everybody's, "Hey, it's Cruze, he's back." And then a lot of hugs, and they gave me my jungle gear, and they gave me my machine gun and my 45, and waiting for orders. And I do remember one night they put me up on like a place at night, like a 4-hour watch, to look for enemy, and I had an M16, to be a guard up there, and I was freaking out because I'm looking out there in the dark. When do I shoot? And if someone fires, you have the right to. That's what you're trained to do. But still, in your mind, you don't want to look like a jerk off. Shooting at something that could have been an animal or a bird or something that's just freaking you out and just scaring you. So I remember seeing some movement, but I didn't know what it was. I said, "Should I call somebody and tell them that there's something out there, or if it gets close, should I shoot it?" I was like confused as to. I didn't want to look like a jerk off if I shoot, like,
because nobody gave you instructions.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, just go up there. You're a guard up there, and there were other people also, on guard duty. But as the sun came up, what it was the branch of a palm tree go back and forth in the dark. I thought it was movement with the enemy. And I said, "Thank God I didn't shoot, look like a jerk off." It would have been the laughing stock of the platoon. Is the dude, he shot it, whatever, because you're green. You just got there. But from there, we all boarded a C-130, packed us in a C-130 to go to Phu, because we were heading north to Hue. That's where the action was going on. And I remember as we were all packed in there flying, going up and, moving up and down, the mist of the bodies created like heat, from all the bodies being stuffed in that C-130 heading to Phu and hoping that if this goes down, we'll go down together. The thing was going up and down. Finally land, we get out, and then we were taken by 6-bys to go to Hue. And we all boarded that, headed up to Hue, and set up a perimeter, up there. I remember seeing the 101st Airborne, those guys who we were relieving, and you can see there's a look in Vietnam that when you see in combat, that these guys had seen some stuff, and happy that we were there because they were going, I guess, south, wherever they were assigned. And then they had me dig, a bunker for my perimeter to watch the perimeter from my battalion, and we started to run patrols from that area, ambush patrols. That's when I started, seeing people get into firefights.
Yeah, what was the very first one? Do you remember the very first thing you experienced there like that?
I know that we were. I was going on patrol with about, I guess, 11 guys, and we started to get gunfire, and we hit the ground right away. and our squad leader was giving us directions like, well, you go over there, and set something up. But it wasn't a lot. I think it was more like maybe a sniper just shooting at us or getting our attention because we stood there for a while and nothing happened. But your heart starts to beat really fast. You don't know what you're going to deal with. You're waiting for your squad leader to give you commands to set up where you're supposed to set up and defend your position. And as an M60 machine gunner, you're the first guy they want to knock off because you got the biggest weapon. Squad leader, because he's giving orders. He's got the M79, and that's a device that can shoot like a grenade type of ordnance. And then the radio guy, he's the next guy they want because you could call for helicopters. And then me, the guy with the biggest gun, they're looking for. But that was my first. It was a real fast firefight, on patrol. The bigger ones were when we were attacked by mortars at nighttime, middle of the night. Things blowing up all around you, and people get up and barking orders. Where to set up and where they're coming from. We were overrun one night, and a bunch of my buddies got killed. When we were attacked with mortars, and they overran our position. They got into our inside our perimeter. But I was on the other side of the perimeter. I heard about what happened to those guys later after the fact, when the daylight came. And my friend Shamiri was in his sleep, and a mortar came and took him out. He blew his head off. And my other friend, Tyrone, had also in the explosion lost both of his legs, were shredded.
Wow.
My friend Donnie was shot. They were held in position, like you said, like the gunner gets hit and assistant gunner comes in and takes over. And we didn't know that they were in our perimeter till after the fact, till they killed a bunch of the enemy, but that was tough because, you start getting these casualty lists. And when you know the guy really well, you think of the moments you spent with him back in Hawaii, while you were in Waikiki, while you were in the chow, while in the barracks, or something stupid we were doing. And I remember that Shamiri, he's from Long Island. He wanted to shave his head like Yul Brynner. And we thought it was cool. Man, that'd be great. And then they can't, attack you because your hair is so long, and little did we know that was an offense to shave your head. You couldn't. You had to have it, regulation like the Marine Corps wants it. And he was going to be written up. I said, I can't. But what are you writing the guy up? He shaved his head. He said, no, you can't shave your head in the Marine Corps. You have to have it the way we tell you to have it. But I remember that instance when I was told that he was, he was killed in the attack. I said, wow, that moment came of him shaving his head, how much fun we had with him almost being written up and big up that, And then I didn't see Tyrone till I was wounded later in Guam and I was in my wheelchair going down the ward in Guam. And I was so happy to see him. I said, hey, Tyrone, what's up? And I knew that he was wounded, but I didn't know to what extent. I heard his legs were wounded, and he had a blanket over his legs. And I came up, and and he was still little sad. I said, "What's up, dude?" And then he pushed the blanket over, and his legs were gone from the knee down. I said, oh, dude, man! And the thing I remember about we used to go to Waikiki and dance, and that guy would be dancing, And I thought that guy's not going to be dancing like that anymore, And it's like got sad real quick, when he told me. I remembered that was because you were overrun that night.
How long in was that? Was that night you got overrun? How long had you been there, you think?
That was about, let's see, May, March. I would say about first week in April, about 3 weeks into, because we had gone to Da Nang, then we flew to Phu Bai. We stood in Da Nang for a while, then Phu Bai, then we got set a perimeter and started running patrols. And then they have what they call platoon patrol base camps, where they send a platoon, set up a base, and run patrols from that area. And so that's what we did with with our platoon to go up there, and that's when we were attacked and overrun. We were out there as a platoon because Delta Company has, I think, 4 platoons. I think it's 1,200 guys per battalion, and then they split it up into companies. So then the companies themselves have, I think, 4 platoons to a company. So they sent one platoon out there. It was like 30 guys or 40 guys and set up a perimeter, I think with 2 machine guns, if I can remember. And then run patrols from there on ambushes. The first big one was from from Easter Sunday, Good Friday to Easter Sunday. We were getting into it by this tree line in a schoolhouse, and Alpha Company and Bravo Company lost 22 guys in 3 days, and I was about 30 or 40 wounded. I was set up in a certain place. Those guys got really banged up pretty much. That was the biggest casualty loss when I was there, Good Friday to Easter.
Wow.
Yeah. The next big one was when I was wounded on Operation Allenbrook, but we flew from Hue back to Da Nang to join operations in Operation Allenbrook. Major operation. There was a lot of North Vietnamese in that area, a lot of mines. And so the day that I was wounded, we lost 30 Marines. My buddy got killed next to me. I almost lost my arm. I had a hole in my arm. I got this went from here through to here. My leg was almost torn off. My body got shredded because I turned when we were advancing forward just to distance myself away from him, and he moved to his right, and I must have tripped something, and the explosion went off, and he was facing it, so he died instantly. Where I at least was.
Was it a mine?
Yeah, a mine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something that happened so quick. And the last thing, I was talking. You remember we had a word or two and moved, and this thing just blew up, and I just remember laying there. I don't know how long I was unconscious. I know it was a time, whether it was 5 seconds or 10 seconds, I don't know. But when I started to come to consciousness, I was confused. My ears were ringing. I felt my body hurting. And I was in a position where my machine gun and my arm was almost dislocated. And I was in a bad position. And the bullets that I had was like digging into my chest because of the way I was positioned when I fell from the blast. And I heard commands like medic, 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 and I'm still trying to think like what just happened. I'm thinking, okay, we don't hear any incoming fire, so we're not being attacked. I don't hear any rockets coming in, so maybe, it had to be a mine, that went off. Because they had told us, guys, be careful. If there are mines as we advance forward. And then I said, "Oh, Stamato." I thought, and I talked to the medic, while he was administering the morphine. When he saw how bad it was, I said, "Forget it. He's done. He's gone. We got to get you calling a chopper, Huey, a chopper to get you." So I just laid there, and I felt then my joints just hurting, like pounding. And I started to feel good because the morphine kicked in. And I was like, wow, the pain just like subsided. Chopper came. They had a, what would you call it? Stretcher put me on, took me into the chopper. Boom, we took off. And as we ascended, I looked down, I could see, my buddies down there, and I felt, Jesus, I'm leaving my buddies, man. This is my gear is down there, instead of thinking, dude, if you're leaving, you're all messed up. My thought was, I'm leaving my buddies and my Stamato, he's down there, and it was loud because of the rotor blades and they were going through the air. And when we landed, they ran out medics, I guess, or nurses, and I vaguely remember them running out like MASH,
Yeah.
Took me into the field hospital and started to cut my uniform off and all my gear that I had on me to see where I was wounded, I guess, and from there, right into the OR. And I kind of, like I said, I kind of faintly remember things about that experience, not in detail, but kind of little images of what I remember. And then I was in the operating room, is what I remember, and an orderly came over and says, "This is Cruze. You're under anesthesia. You're going to go under. So just take it easy, and you're going to go out." And I laid there, and I focused in on this clock that was on the wall, and I remember the red second hand going around. I kept focusing on that, and I immediately said, "I wonder if my parents and my family knows what's going on." You know, could they ever imagine what's going on with me? What just happened? Boom, I was out. I went out. And the next thing I remember is I woke up in a ward, all bandaged up. My arms were heavily bandaged. My legs were heavily bandaged. Just had a sheet over me. And it was about 3:00 in the morning. And I was trying to get the orderly's attention, to see if I could get something to eat. I was really hungry. 18-year-olds, what do I get to eat? And a little groggy, and he came over. He says, what do you need? I said, I'm hungry. Can you get me some? No, you're under anesthesia. You got to wait, a while. I could get you some water. That's about all I can do. I said, can I get some water? So he got me some water. Boom, I crashed. Next thing I remember is that there was a lot of commotion going on this morning, and I get up, and they were having rounds of doctors, and there was a lot of going on. Breakfast was being served. I said, oh, good. I'm going to get a meal. And they came over to me, and they asking me how I feel, and I told them I'm feeling fine because I was on Demerol. I'm on good drugs. I didn't know what I was dealing with other than I was feeling good. I was eating. I do remember that I think one night the orderlies had flak jackets on because they thought they were going to be attacked with mortars. I thought, this is great. Here I am, just laying here, and we're going to have mortars come and hit this field hospital. But we're fine. It was just more of a precaution, I do remember looking at those other veterans in their beds, wondering how the hell are they going to go back home without legs, without an arm, blind. You guys were, bandaged over their eyes or shot up, and thinking, I'm in one piece, I'm banged up, but I'm in one piece. How do you go back and deal with that, 'Cause I've never seen it, movies I've saw it, and maybe someone without legs, in a hospital, or someone with crutches as a kid growing up, but never to see actual combat veterans, with the injuries they sustained. I was there for a few days. I do remember that they were placing Purple Hearts with a pillow, and the general was supposedly going to come and give us our Purple Heart. I was so excited about that. And it was there an hour or 2 hours, and wondering, when's this guy going to come? All of a sudden, the orderly comes and starts picking up all the Purple Hearts. I says, what's going on? I says, the general couldn't make it. He says, all right, I guess I'm not going to get my Purple Heart. But I did get it later. I'll let you know when. But from there, I went to Guam, and we got there late in Guam. I was stationed there for more exploratory operations to see what they could do with the arm. They got to cut it off, save the arm and the leg. Thank God they did.
At this point, do your parents know?
That's another story I'm going to tell you now.
Okay.
So while I'm in Guam, because I got the more operations. They looked at my wounds. They were pretty bad because they had packing in the hold in my arm, and packing in the hole that went through this arm and in my leg. And there was a Red Cross lady coming with a portable phone. And it was like a long wire and with the old type phone, that you dial, and was wondering what that was all about. And she came up to my bed and said, would you like to make a call home? I says, really? I can call home? Because I hadn't spoken to them to call from Hawaii, from any place in the world, expensive as hell. And yeah. She said, do you know? Oh, I know the number. She said, so he said, you can only do 5 minutes because we're trying to give every veteran an allotted time. I said, yeah, great. So I call, phone's ringing and the phone's ringing. And I'm thinking, wow, because back then there was no answering service, it rang and it
Right.
rang. Nobody was home, So finally the phone picks up and it's my Uncle Jim. He says, hello. Because he's wondering, who the hell's calling up at 5 a.m? I didn't know it's 5, the international date line, and we're ahead. And I said, Uncle Jim? He says, yeah, who's this? He says, it's Josh. Josh, aren't you supposed to be in Vietnam? And I said, well, didn't they send you a telegram? Because they usually tell a telegram to let your son was wounded or, was deceased. That deceased, I think they send someone at the door, a chaplain come to tell you, but that I was wounded. And he says, no, what happened to you? I says, oh, look, I'm okay. I'm coming home. I was in an element explosion. My legs and my arms were injured, but I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm coming home. Okay. And so I just tell my dad and my mom that I'm coming home. Okay. I said, great. So I said, wow. I thought to myself, I can't believe that they didn't send them, a telegram telling them that I was wounded, because I've heard that that's what they do. Your son's been wounded and gone, but he's okay. And a contact. And the story goes that we lived in a 3-story house in Brooklyn. My uncle and grandparents lived on the bottom and second floor. Mom and dad lived on the 3rd floor. And the bathroom was outside by the stairway going in, and then the apartment. And my dad was shaving to go to work, and Jimmy came up and knocked on the door. And my mom was making coffee, she said, and they said, who could that be? Peter said, it can't be Peter. So she comes, says, Jimmy, what happened? I says, listen, just got a call from Josh. He's been wounded in Vietnam, and my dad was heard it, and he closed the door. He was upset. He was crying. My mom, he was crying. He was really upset. Nobody's coming home. He's fine. He's okay. He's coming home. So my dad called up. Excuse me. My dad was calling the military to find out he wants to fly to Guam to see his son, because he was really worried. He heard that I was injured, my legs and arms. He didn't know if I was covering up, something that was worse. And he said, no, Mr. Cruze, they told him he's coming home. Be patient. He'll be home in about 10 days, a week to 10 days. He's okay. We're taking good care of him. He says, but you don't have to do that. By the time you get to Guam, he'll be home, So that's what happened. From Guam, we flew on a C-130 with, they had us like on racks,
Wow.
laying down. I still couldn't wear, no, at that time I could wear a blouse, because they took all the bandages off. And when I got to Hawaii, that's when they gave me my Purple Heart. A guy came in and while we were, what do you call it? Refueling in Hawaii. Flew to Andrews Air Force
Hold on.
Base.
You're saying a guy came on the airplane?
Yeah.
They didn't take you off?
They came on, they put Purple Hearts, and they awarded us Purple Heart because they didn't give it to us when they wanted to give us, but they couldn't in Vietnam. So that was cool. I had my Purple Heart. They put it on my pajama. I got a picture of that, which is kind of cool. Went to Andrews. I think it was Andrews Air Force Base. They flew us there on a C-140. And I remember being in the hospital, eating a meal, watching TV, and Bobby Kennedy was shot live while I was watching it. It's holy God, they shot Bobby Kennedy. I was like,
you must have thought the world was ending.
You did, because we were in Vietnam in April when they killed Martin Luther King, and the brothers, were like what? How messed up that was. They killed the king. They killed King, and they're like, wow. They had these little transistor radios. They were listening to, the reports. First I think he was like wounded. He was shot at, but didn't know. And then they confirmed that he was dead. And I'm saying, what the hell's going on? So from there, I flew to San Antonio, stayed in San Antonio overnight. We flew to Dover, got to a smaller plane to Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, New York. From there, a bus to St. Albans. And that's where I stood till I was sent to active duty again, minimal active duty. But I remember that I was in the hospital ward, and they had me in this room in the Naval Hospital where you two to a bed, like in a little cubicle, and you could see who's coming from the end of the ward from the reflection of the glass in from your bed. You could see when the food's coming or they're making their rounds. You could see. So my dad's coming and he goes, Joshua. He's looking at me and I'm thinking, oh my God, please, Dad, don't embarrass me. He wanted to see his son. The story was, I lost one leg, I lost both legs, I lost two arms, I lost one arm. You tell somebody a story and no one knows how it's going to be interpreted as it gets to the last person. And so he wanted to see that his son was in one piece, So he comes in, he's looking at me, Dad, I'm fine. It's okay. I'm okay, Dad. And it was an emotional moment for him and I, he was happy. And I stayed in St. Albans for about 3 months. They had to do another operation on my leg. And hanging out with those veterans in that hospital was just hard to watch these guys. I remember this one guy, they shot his calf to the point that all you had was the bone, the shin bone, and they had, it wired up, and they were trying to see if they could put a skin graft on it and somehow salvage the leg. And at one point, the doctor said, look, we're going to have to, son, amputate that leg. It's not surviving. And he was so upset. Please save my leg. Please don't take my leg. Do something. Oh, my God. It was tough to watch that. Another guy had part of his forearm blown off. And they attached his forearm to the side of his body for a skin graft. And he had this full body cast on, and we'd go and play cards with him because he couldn't leave the bed, to keep him company. But he smelled it, but the rotting flesh was so bad that we had the white guard, and we'd spray him, dude. He was killing us. We were trying to play cards with him. And then finally, they detached the arm, and they did a pretty good job with the skin graft, and we were happy for him that they saved his arm, but that smell you will never forget, the smell of rotting flesh. Oh, my God, it was awful. I don't know how the nurses did it, But eventually I was put on light duty. I was sent to the brig over in the Brooklyn Naval Yard. They had a brig there. So they had me do administrative work in my uniform until I got, medically discharged from the Marine Corps. And that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What happened after?
Lived with mom and dad. I was kind of engaged to the Italian girl. I'd been dating since 15 and a half, 16, when the old time. And she was Italian, I'm Puerto Rican. There were issues with that.
This is a West Side Story all over.
Oh, definitely, man. Absolutely, because they moved into a part of Brooklyn that was a nice melting pot of Irish American, Italian American, Jewish American. We even had Swedes and Norwegian. We had a Norwegian Day Parade. We had Greeks. They owned the diner. It was a nice melting pot of people. So Dad wanted me to get some Puerto Rican gal. I says, where in this neighborhood? I got to go to Spanish Harlem if you want that to happen, and hang out with my cousins up there, in the projects, But nice girl, we had two kids, and but the problems were, the nightmares, not nightmares, sweating, cold sweats. We never really had any proper transition. You went from a war experience and, okay, you're home, live your life. Not knowing that a lot of these veterans who came home with a lot of scars, not to mention the demonstrations, when those World War II veterans and Korean, they got massive support from the citizens. They got parades. They got, us, we were a bunch of losers. We were a bunch of assassins. We were baby killers.
So you felt that was real for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I lived on the history of my dad going to World War II, and my uncle Korea, my uncle Jim. My brother was going to be going into the Army, when he became 18. And to feel that you weren't appreciated, to know that you actually joined. You didn't even, wait for a letter from the Selective Service. You went and joined.
So did you even tell anybody you went over there?
No, I was, most Latin men, and I would say men in general, have an issue with showing any back then in the 60s, any sign of weakness, in maybe the police department because you want to get promoted or a fireman, you show that, you're not going to get promoted because you have issues. No, we don't want you. If you got an issue with that, we don't want, you're not going to get, so you don't talk. So you drink. You're an abusive person. You do things that, to deal with what you're personally going with. And I feel for the people who couldn't find a resource or deal with it. I had a tough time. It was bad on my marriage. It was bad on my kids. Not that I did anything overtly to help them, but I shut down. They hated when I would shut down and take off because I didn't want to act out and get angry because I didn't know. That always took me to a bad place when I felt like that in combat.
When did you kind of come to grips to that? I mean, when did you figure that out?
My first wife and I split up, because I just couldn't deal. My daughter crying, was an intense thing because I remember the kids crying in Vietnam. When we go into search and destroy missions, we would round up the village folks to see if there's any weapons in the hooches and to see if there's anybody that's an enemy. I remember my buddies sitting around these kids and women and just said, "Oh, this is just so wrong." See these kids cry like this. It's not who we are. So when my daughter cried, in bed, or she, it took me back to that. Reminding me of those kids. So I just went and I became, solitary. I moved out. And I.
How old were you at this point?
22.
Okay.
22 years old.
Young,
house
young
and
still.
so young, and went to college and got an education. I figured I'm going to do it on my own and find a way, find a path. I studied German. I studied Italian. I knew Spanish, and I wanted to go into the diplomatic corps. Maybe at the UN to be an interpreter and find a career because I had odd jobs here and there. I worked in a bank. I truck driver, this and that. And just wasn't finding my way. I worked because, I needed to do something, but, so I said, maybe I'll do that. It's diplomatic corps, got kind of a military related thing to it. I know languages and that'd be something I can make a living at. And it wasn't until I got into my junior year, I graduated from Staten Island Community College with honors, which was a shock to me. I never saw myself as an honor student, but funny story. I remember getting a letter from the dean to you're on the dean's list. And to me, when I was in high school, if the dean called you down because you did something bad, you cut class or you didn't come to school or whatever. So when I got these letters, you're on the dean's list, I said, man, what did I do? What could I have done? I think I'm doing it right. I'm getting A's and I'm getting B's, I'm passing my classes. And when I graduated, they sent me a letter. We have a reception for you. For being on the dean's list and having a 3-point, you're an honor student. And I invited my parents. I was so proud for this reception. And then I talked to the lady. I said, I didn't know what those letters meant. I thought I was getting, it because I was doing something bad. Is no, you were doing great. you were holding almost a 3.5 grade point average. And it's, and I told her why I thought getting something from the dean because of my personal experience in high school. But that's how focused I was. And then so when I went to Richmond College, I had like a breakdown, a depression for some reason. I was sent to the hospital for observation. I don't know. I think the workload at school, the combat experience came back, the drug culture around me, from the band, the musicians. I was a lead singer in a band and people taking all these drugs and I was just like in a bad place, and I needed some guidance. So they sent me to the VA hospital on the Lower East Side of Manhattan on 24th Street for observation for 48 hours as a mandatory thing. When you say you're thinking of, and feeling the way you are about suicide, this and that, they got to do that precaution to serve you. So I went there and I got out, and they gave me a counselor, and started to see a counselor. And then I lived in Manhattan to be studying at Hunter College. And that's when I met my second wife, at Hunter College. And I think I tell you the story how I got into acting.
Yeah, just give me a little short form of that.
A little short form. So I starting to be, language major, Romance language major, to be an interpreter. I said, I got to fulfill my 125 credit, curriculum. And I says, what could I do, pick, that's going to, coordinate with my schedule so I'm not going back and forth to college. I said, I'll take this acting class. That kind of, it's all within the same time frame, and I don't have to come back to school because I lived on the west side. And with the three crazy guys. And I took this acting class, and the minute the professor said that we would have to go see a show of his, attend 2 other shows for credit, do a paper, and then do a monologue of the scene. I said, I'm fine. So after the class, he says, does anyone, we have some time left. Does anybody want to go and do a monologue? And so because they were theater majors, everybody's raising their hands. I want to go. So I said, oh, it's cool. Let's see what these kids are all about. So they got up and they started doing these monologue, and I'm saying, I'm out of here. There's no way I'm going to get up and do that. They were really good, They did Shakespeare. They did well-known plays. And I went up to the professor at the end of the class. I said, Professor Richards, I'm going to drop this class. He said, why? He said, I don't think I can go up and do that, And he said, what's your story? He says, well, I'm here on the, VA program. I want to be an interpreter, this and that. And, but I don't think I could pass this class. I can't get up there and do what those kids. I said, what's your story? I said, I'm a veteran. I was in the Marine Corps. I was in Vietnam. I'm a combat veteran. And he looked at me. He said, really? Well, let me get this straight. You went to Vietnam. You were wounded in combat. You got out. You're studying. And you're afraid of a bunch of kids after you've been through combat? He says, you know what? You're not dropping this class. You need this. This is going to help you, with post-traumatic. That's all I was, in the hospital. I had a tough time with post-traumatic stress disorder. Is you need this. Get yourself a monologue. You're not dropping this class. And he left. And I'm thinking, who talks to me like this? You're not dropping the class. I used to drop classes, and it was too much. I didn't think it was what it was. So what am I going to do? So I studied in an all boys school that I was in, Alexander Hamilton Boys High School for draftsmen and architects, and we did study a Shakespearean play, and it was Julius Caesar. And one of the assignments for that class was you got to have a monologue, and then we'll do a scene throughout the school term. And so I said, I'll do that. I think I kind of remember that monologue from Julius Caesar, which is, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. So I went, memorized that, came back to class. I'm thinking, oh man, I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if I get up there and do this. I know the thing. And all the kids signed the paper to go up. I would sign like number 10. Let me see what they're doing. Get the cojones to get up there and do what they're doing. So finally, I said, well, who's next? And I raised my hand. I'll get up there. So I get up there, and I'm still freaking out. And I'm thinking, Josh, just do it. Just do it. Get up. You know this. You do it. I went and did the monologue. And I got off feeling really good. I got through it. It turned out to be better than I thought it was. It's like taking castor oil, yeah. And then it's over, So the teacher after the class asked me, how did you think you did? I said, I think I did pretty good. He said, good. I think you did pretty good. Now get yourself a seed partner, and you're not dropping this. So that's how it started. I started studying with him. I had to go see a play on Broadway that he directed, because back in the day, there was no internet. There was no way of knowing who these professors were that you wanted to take class with in college. And I went to see this play, and I loved the theater because when I got back from Vietnam, the USO over by 42nd Street gave veterans free tickets to all these plays. They donated musical dramas and concerts and all kinds of wonderful things that they gave free tickets for. So I loved the theater. I just didn't want to get up on stage and do it. And so I went to see this play, and it was a one-character play. And I said to myself, who has got the cojones to go on stage for 2 hours? Wow, man. I mean, and it's full. It was a full house. And I was proud that my professor directed this actor that's on stage tonight. So for 2 hours, I was mesmerized just watching this guy command this stage. Like, wow, unbelievable. Now, back then, I didn't know who this actor was until he became who he was, which is James Earl Jones, was the actor on that stage with that deep voice, commanding the stage. It was wow. And then I said, Jesus, my professor directed this guy. He must be somebody. Eventually, I started to ask who he was. Oh, man, he directed Sidney Poitier on Broadway and Raising His Son. He did Roots. He's like, wow. And I was so proud that was the guy who changed my course in life from going to be, an interpreter maybe at the UN or in the diplomatic corps to becoming the actor that I've become and worked for the last 50 years, as an actor, as a singer, and as a musician, as a writer of 5 CDs that I've produced, of music video. I've worked with some of the greatest people in Hollywood because of that one man encouraging me to take a different path or to do something that I was maybe afraid of doing. And because I did it, it took me to in a different direction in my life.
Okay, along those lines, tell me about Tracers, how that changed your life.
Okay, so as customary for actors, on Thursday night, they would release a publication called Backstage, and I forget what the other one was, Backstage and something else, Showbiz and Backstage. And every actor would go and look to see what auditions they were holding so that whether it was film, the theater, whatever. So this one Thursday, I looked through it and I saw that this play was requiring actors who were Vietnam veterans. That was, the thing that they wanted. You had to be a Vietnam veteran. So I looked at them, no, it's not for me. Forget about it.
And back that up for the audience, just you'd kind of dropped that identity.
I was a closet veteran. I did not celebrate Veterans Day, Memorial Day. I didn't want to hear anything on the 4th of July in terms of explosions. I just shut down. I was an actor to do, stage plays that had nothing to do with war and just deal with my own personal psychological injury because of the war through acting, through music, and finding that a constructive way of dealing with that, but not to do a play about Vietnam. My wife, who was an actress, my second wife, Peg, said to me, hey, there's this play, they want Vietnam veterans. I'm not interested. He says, why? They're doing it at the public theater. It's a reputable theater. And they do wonderful plays down there. You always audition every year to be auditioned. And I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not interested. But the day of the interviews, they were doing interviews first. They wanted to see who's a real Vietnam vet and not. And something talked to me in my mind, just go down and see what this is all about. It's a Vietnam play, So I went down to the union office and they held lots of auditions for many things there. And I went to the room that was designated for them to interview the Vietnam veterans. I remember going up to the monitor and I saw there was like 25, 30 names that had already signed to be seen for this Tracers production. And I talked to the monitor. I said, look, I got to do a CBS promo. I said, is there any way I could go ahead of this line? I don't want to be late for this. And he said, no, you're going to have to wait your turn. And I'm thinking, oh, how screwed this is up. You know what? It's a sign. I said, it's not for you. Let me just go. I'm walking out and two people walk in. Vincent Christie, who was one of the writers, I found out, and one of the actors in the play, and a lady by the name of Anne Mae Hobson, who was a stage manager coming to interview all these so-called Vietnam veterans. So I just went up to him and said, look, I cannot say, here's my picture and resume. If you're looking for Vietnam veterans, I did serve in Vietnam. And then I was ready to leave. He said, no, come in the room. And then I kind of looked at everyone, and the monitor looked at me like, did you just jump the line, you thinker? And so I said, I didn't jump the line. I just wanted to leave. And he was the one who invited me. So I go into the room, and he started grilling me. Where were you in Vietnam? What was your MOS? What was your rank? And asking all the basic questions to see if you were for real or if you're, an imposter. And as I was leaving, I said, excuse me, Vinny, I said, I don't think a lot of those guys are Vietnam vets are out there. They don't even look like it's. We're going to find out who they are. 2 or 3 questions, boom, they're out of here. We know exactly who's been to Vietnam and who's not been to Vietnam. So, okay. So I left. And I went home knowing that I had to go pick up a script, and they would call me to know where to pick the script up at the Veterans Ensemble Theater Company, which was on 54th Street and Broadway. I've heard about it, but never wanted to get involved because I didn't want to deal with the war. And they were doing a lot of plays about Vietnam. And so I went to the office asking to get the play so I can read it at home. And they said, I'm sorry, Miss Josh, we can't let you take it home. You got to read it here. And I said, oh, God, great. I am the slowest reader on the planet. The last thing I would do is to sit here and spend 4 hours of my life, reading a play. I want to take it home and digest it. So I started to read. Within the first 15 pages, I was moved. I said, wow, I already know where these guys are coming from. I was so engrossed. Now I'm reading. I finished the first act. I went to hand the play back, and the woman said, what did you think? I said, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. Whoever wrote this play got it. They got the essence of what it's like to be in the military and serve in the military and serve in Vietnam. I want to do this play so bad. He says, all right, come back Friday. I think this was Tuesday, and Friday we'll have the second act for you. They're working on this. The second act is going into being inducted, going to Vietnam, what it's like being in Vietnam, killing for the first time, picking up. I mean, it was really detailed. We're going to have the second act about coming home, dealing with Agent Orange, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what we're writing about. So come back Friday. I go back Friday, and I pick up. I'm really excited. And between that day and Friday, I talked to my wife. I said, Peg, I says, I want to do this play. It says, yeah. I said, I want to do this play. This play is really important to me. And so when I went back, I went and met John DeFusco. And John is a conceiver of the play. And he directed it. And I think he did the role that he wanted me to do. And he said to me, what did you think? I said, John, I said, wow, you guys nailed it. I want to be a part of this production. And at that time I had, some nice credits, I worked on soap operas and commercials, and I've done theater and, but I wanted to do this play, and so who do you see yourself doing out of the 7 characters? And I said, well, I could see me doing, Dinky Down. Which means crazy in Vietnamese. He said, no, you're not going to do that. He says, we already got the actor who created the role, who came from Los Angeles. He's here to do this play at the Public Theater with Vincent Cruze, who you just met. He's doing Baby Son. He said, try to focus in on Scooter or Doc. And it's okay. So I went home. Second act was great, dealing with all the issues we all deal with when we get back from Vietnam and out of the military. And I auditioned for both roles, and I said, thank you very much, Josh. Thank you very much. You did a great job. And I went home, and wondering if, if you're going to get casted. It was, sure enough, they called me on the phone. This is Josh. We want to cast you to Olive Dock. And I was so happy, that, these guys were all going to be Vietnam vets dealing with my issues, because you could talk to someone who's been there. They get it. You get it. People, they can't understand what it's like to see, the images we all seen in combat. They could say, oh, that's, it's bad. I'm so sorry. But the guys who've been there, when you talk about it, they know.
Yeah.
They know. They've been there. And so we opened, we rehearsed. We opened in January of 1985. And we were being reviewed by a lot of the press because of the subject matter. They wanted to see who these Vietnam vets were, it was produced in the Odyssey Theater in Los Angeles, and then it was produced by Gary Sinise. Dennis Farina was in that cast, and a bunch of other people have become famous at the Steppenwolf in Chicago. And now here we are producing it in New York. And when opening night, Joe Papp, who was the impresario of the public theater, gets up and hits his glass. I want to read you this review. And it was a rave review of the play. We were just so happy because someone accepted us. We were sold out. We were sold out every night. And it was just amazing to see people come who had been to Vietnam, the parents who have lost children from Vietnam, the sisters, a brother. You guys got it. Thank you so much for honoring our brother. And it was rough. I mean, for me, I had to go back and deal with a lot of issues of my personal combat experience. But those guys were there for me. They hugged me, or I hugged them. We knew, they helped you through your challenges because, as I sat there waiting to go on, those sounds of guns, those explosions, the verbiage, the experiences were coming through there. And sometimes I'd be shaking backstage, saying, you got to go on, dude. You got to go do your scene. But so grateful that, they were there for me. As tough as it was sometimes. During the rehearsal process, it was tough for me.
So that was part of a healing process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were there to hug me when I was like shaking and telling them about what I'm just telling you, my combat experience. I could talk about my combat experience because if someone can relate to know what we went through as veterans, or any veteran in war, World War II, Korea, World War I, what people on both sides, I don't celebrate us as winners. I celebrate, knowing that people were put in a situation that didn't want to. I'm sure there were Germans that hated to be in that war, Japanese that hated to be in the war, but because they were forced to be punished if they didn't, they had to go through with what they were asked to do. And men and now women, women were killed, just recently in an explosion, drones would come in, to have someone come to your door and say that your son was killed in action.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Yeah.
Rough, for a parent to hear. I was my mom's firstborn, but I followed tradition, my family. At the expense of knowing that, we saw him September, he went to Vietnam. We might not see him ever again.
Yeah.
So, and then to survive that and then have an amazing career with people that I love, talented people for 50 years. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a very rare, incurable cancer, which is crazy because, didn't drink, didn't smoke, exercise, fun person. I mean, just to be around. And when my body started hurting, and I started fatiguing, and I went for my general exam, my yearly exam. And when I heard that doctor say, after the second visit, because they picked it up in my first exam, they wanted me to come back and tell me, what they thought they found, confirmed, which was a rare incurable cancer. And I thought I was in a scene in a movie, like we've seen the doctor coming with his folder. He says, Josh, I got some news. I says, you need to be seen by an oncologist right away because we think you have multiple myeloma and you need to be treated right away. We don't know how bad you are. And and I said, well, I never heard of it. What's multiple what? Myeloma? He says, yeah, it's a rare incurable cancer and you need to be seen right away. And he left. And I was in shock. It wasn't just cancer. No, it was rare and it was incurable. Oh, you got cancer, but we got, something we could do for it. We come here and we got, no. And you got to get me seen right away. And so I was in that room alone. And the first thing I thought about was my daughter, who was, 11 or 12, and my mom, who was taking care of. Who's going to take care of her? And I went home and I researched and I saw, 36 months survival.
Wow.
48 months.
How long ago was that?
June of 2014.
Wow.
I'm on my 12th year. Wow. They don't know what I'm made of. The doctor says, look, I don't know. I can't believe you're playing racquetball. I can't believe you're working. I can't believe you do the things. This is not supposed to happen. I says, there are the people that are the exception in life. And that's who I focus on, the exception, not on the rule. Because there are people who have survived longer than 3 years, 4 years. And every day they come up with new trial drugs and new medications to retard the disease. But that's because either I get it from Agent Orange or because I served in Camp Lejeune, which was receiving tainted water, toxic water for 30 years. People were getting sick, and I was there. No one has cancer in my family.
You've lived an extraordinary life, my friend.
So they tell me. So it's the challenges all of us as humans that we receive. It's how you deal with it as a human being. People suffer even here at stateside by the loss of a family member, or, something tragic, or news that you have a rare cancer, or having your child die from a cancer. I mean, we all have our challenges in life, and I've been blessed to always ask for something that's greater than me to give me a direction. How do I beat this? How do I get through the next day? How do I sitting there 4 hours with this, liquid going into my veins, for 4 hours, 5 hours, blood transfusions, different medications, being on a steroid called dexamethasone and going up and down emotionally, flying off the handle for the smallest of things that you can handle in the past. And people telling me, are you on dexamethasone? Could you chill a bit? I'm sorry. And you realize and you hate yourself because the steroid, it's 40 milligrams a week, jacks you up to the point that the most minuscule thing
sets you
off, and you got to just chill, don't go there, or you become a chatterbox, and you feel like an idiot. I've just talked to this guy. I could see he's sitting there just listening to me for 2 hours, and I'm just, those are the things, that all cancer patients go through. And I feel for those folks because I just realized that right from here, where we're at right now, the lady down the block was diagnosed in 2022, which is, 3 years ago, she passed away.
With the same thing you had?
Same thing, multiple myeloma. We're all not the same as human beings because, there are things called miracles. Doctors can't explain it. They just don't know.
Yeah.
I want to be that miracle. I wish everyone had a miracle, like me, that I can, and if I can talk about it and show people that I am the exception, maybe they'll think that way too. They'll embrace that. I'm going to do what he did. I just go see yourself the way you want to be, the way you were before you got sick, over and over. Take that time, and hopefully that'll be, something that'll help you, and maybe even cure you.
Your takeaway from your experience in Vietnam, what's your And
Life
looking
is
back, all this
precious.
thing. Start again?
Life is precious. Every second is a gift. Every minute is a gift. Know how to utilize it to the base of its capability. It's there for all of us. It's all in our being. You just got to go in and look for it, research it, and enjoy it. And every morning I get up, I think we talked about the mantra I have. Everyone believes in something different, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Allah, whether it's Christ, whether it's God, whatever it is that you believe in. It's what I reach out to in the universe and say, please gift me the answers and solutions to all that I face today and every day with love and kindness for the good of all. Because we all need those answers and solutions in our lives. And if it's a gift from somewhere that's greater than you and get you through it, that's all you need. The answer and solution to make you a happier person, a more productive person. Deal with the issues that we're dealing with in this country that are really one of the most divided country I've ever seen in my lifetime. How do you deal with a bunch of guys at the gym that have different points of view with their politics, with their religion? And I say to them, look, I live on my own terms. I'm not here to criticize anybody. I treat people with the same respect that I want them to treat me with. And that's it. If there's a lot of noise and a lot of negativity, I just move on. I say, you know what? I got something to do. If that's what you believe, that's okay. I'm going to make myself a hot dog and some mustard and sit and watch something crazy on a movie I haven't seen in a while, or pictures of my kids or something. Reach out to my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. Something positive. It's there for all of us. But if you want to live in that, in that space, that's okay. That's your choice. It's not mine.
Yeah.
I choose to live on, it's a big universe, plenty of space for all of us. Take a car, just drive somewhere and just look out at, in the desert. It's just so quiet out there. Or a nice forest or a beautiful sunset. Those are things available to you. You don't have to be, in the situation you are if you don't want to be.
War is such a weird thing in the sense that it comes with these real extremes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So much negativity happens, and then so much positivity happens in a weird. Is that kind of your takeaway from all that? What do you?
I think it's when you make the realization, when you see the worst situation and the possible better situation, the military's made and trained for a certain purpose, a purpose that governments build on because they need something, whether it's for a better economy, to be represented and respected, on the world scene. And they have to have a military ready to protect those beliefs, Would I do it again? I don't, think I would, maybe back then could I go and change it? That wouldn't change a thing because I wouldn't be who I am today. Can I give someone advice about if they want to go into the military and do something? I said, think about this before you join and see if that's a choice that you would want to make. That's up to you.
Yeah.
Do your research. See if you're able to sustain those feelings and those experiences after the fact. I'm in a great place right now, and I'm so grateful for that. My family, my grandkids, my friends, talented friends. I mean, I just kept telling them how blessed I am. It's just a joy to get up and be in the situation after all they've been through. Because there were times I laid there and says, my wife said, you better go see him. He's not going to come out of the hospital. He's got pneumonia. He's really bad. I'm here.
Man, you wouldn't know it. You are a young 70-year-old man, I'll tell you that.
76 6 months.
Yeah, that was
76 6 month. And 2 years ago, they put me on a trial drug. I was down to 125 pounds, no hair. My nails were rotten, weak as can be. Couldn't play the guitar. couldn't go out on auditions, couldn't play racquetball, sitting in my living room, wondering if I even wanted to live another day because of the state I was in physically mostly, and then mentally, what that does to, well, a person, a human being, to know how active and how grateful you were just to get up and go and be able to take a shower, get dressed without hurting, or make a meal for yourself without stumbling or tripping over yourself or dropping things. And now that I'm able to do that, I'm so grateful. You know, I don't know if I told you this, but I remember there was a time I was in a mall with my daughter, and she was wanting to, Daddy, I got to have this moments. Daddy, I got to have the moments. I know, okay, we'll get it, and I was under treatment, and I under the dexamethasone and going through my, why me? Why am I going through this? This is BS, blah, blah, blah. And here's this kid, in my face wanting this thing in the mall. I want to be home. I don't want to be doing this. And I was berating myself to some degree, like, and I turned around and I saw this man, I would say he's between 25 and 30 years old, in a motorized wheelchair. And the only way that this man could make that wheelchair move was blowing through a straw to give it direction and movement. And this young Latina girl came over and wiped his forehead because he was sweating. And he was paralyzed from the neck down. And I gave myself a wake-up call. I says, dude, the minute that you're in that chair, then you can complain. You're not even close to that. Not even close. So shut the... Okay? And appreciate what you have, because at least you could get dressed. At least you could feed yourself. You can be with your daughter, even though she's a little pain in the neck, And he can't do that. He's, paralyzed. And he's got this girl with him. And I've changed my attitude from that point on. I think of that guy in that chair whenever I get to a mood. We all go through them. Why this? What? And John, you're not in that wheelchair.
That's a good attitude.
You're not in that wheelchair. So shut up. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for coming. And I know you're interviewing other veterans. They all have their personal experience. It was a long war. We're talking about, 14, 15 years. Every year of that war was different.
Yeah, everybody's experience is so different.
So different, know. And we're talking millions of veterans.
Yep.
I think there was 1 million veterans in country at one time.
Yeah.
Think of the services, the food, the uniforms. It's crazy that what we were doing during that time. And so I applaud all those veterans for the ones that made it, because a lot of them came back, mentally destroyed.
There's a cost to it all.
Yeah. And then, of course, not being appreciated, not being honored for their service.
Yeah.
Which we vowed never to do again to any veteran after that experience, the Vietnam veteran. We'll never do that to our veterans again. Blame the politicians. Go up there and take it on them.
Yeah.
We're just doing the job that you sent us to do.
Yeah.
That's it. So to all those veterans out there, welcome home.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Wow.